Hello, my name is Susie West, and today I'm going to talk to you about what shared services is. So I'm the founder and CEO at Shared Services Link, and we're a membership organisation that's been running since 2007. And I'm proud to say I'm a bit of a shared services geek. So let's dive straight in and explore what shared services is. I think it's useful to start with the why, the driver for all of this. So mid-1990s, a lot of enterprise organizations had enjoyed an awful lot of growth, beginnings of globalization, lots of mergers and acquisition activity, and just healthy organic growth. But this was all very exciting, but the problem was that the accounts payable function had become a bit of a problem. All of a sudden, accounts payable organizations found themselves managing thousands of suppliers and hundreds of thousands of invoices, and they didn't really have the infrastructure in place to manage this kind of scale. So what that did is it meant that the AP function couldn't really keep up with the growth demands of the rest of the business. So it was becoming a real burning platform, not just for the people working in AP, but for other stakeholders within the organization that wanted to see growth at a pace. So enterprise organizations generally felt when they were doing or saw when they were doing calculations that the cost to manage the finance function back in about the mid-1990s, when they were operating largely decentralized accounts payable processes, was that the cost of managing finance was about 4% of sales, 4% of turnover. And this really is because of the huge amounts of inefficiencies that existed back then. So to give you an idea of some of the inefficiencies that were happening on a day-to-day basis, costs were simply eye-watering. So just to pay suppliers, a cost to process an invoice was anywhere between $60 and $100, sometimes more than the actual total value of the invoice itself. Real lack of visibility. Because of the decentralized nature of a lot of these accounts payable organizations, it meant that there were lots of different systems in play, and it meant that the CFO, when they wanted to run a report to see what their spend commitments looked like or their liabilities, they needed to really wait for a lot of Excel spreadsheets to be run and pulled together and aggregated to give an overall view of the business's situation. And by that time, it was probably a couple of weeks old, that information. So pretty useless. Suppliers were hugely frustrated, paid late on a routine basis, and the operation simply wasn't scalable. So these companies, these enterprise organizations that wanted to see more positive growth, the AP department just couldn't keep up. There was no one way of doing something, which meant that there was no way of benchmarking a team over in one geography versus a team in another geography, because they were processing invoices in a different way. KPIs were in the red if they indeed had KPIs. They didn't really know what green looked like, and there was just a kind of a lack of awareness about what good looked like in the mid-1990s. And one person really processed about 4,000 invoices a year, which means that productivity was low. Productivity is a real chief KPI for a lot of shared services organizations. And today, obviously, the numbers are very, very different. But back then, mid-1990s, the number of invoices that could be processed per person per year, which is really the productivity definition, was low. It's about 4,000 invoices a year. So let's now zero in on the actual footprint, if you will, of an organization back in the mid-1990s and see what life kind of looked like. So if you imagine an organization back in the mid-1990s, an enterprise company with a presence in 3 key regions. And if you look at the blue squares, this represents the business's entities, the business units. So be that sales and marketing, headquarters, factories, etc. Attached to the majority of these business units would have been an accounting operation, an accounting team, your finance department, local finance team that you could easily just walk down the corridor and have a chat with if there was some kind of query about an invoice that maybe a supplier called you about. So lots of local finance teams, and all these local finance teams operated off their own systems. They maybe sourced a local solution, maybe it was built locally. They might be using SAP, but that SAP version may be different to another SAP version utilized by another finance team in the organization. And their processes were all different. As mentioned earlier, it was an overpopulated finance team. So if you think, even if a small finance team was processing maybe 5,000 invoices a year, they probably still needed at least 2 people to be in that team, just to cover for holidays and sick leave and things like that. And that really meant that the ceiling of your productivity was capped at 2,500 invoices processed per head. So that really, put a limit on your productivity there. So there were really no economies of scale being capitalized on in a model like this. Some of the real disadvantages of a decentralized finance model are listed here. So high cost, no visibility, unhappy suppliers, every transaction touched, and no ability to benchmark. So a solution had to be found to this particular problem, because it really was operational chaos that was happening here. Some people thought, okay, well, centralization could be a solution to this problem. But what centralization really was a part of the solution. It started to tackle the cost, but it didn't really examine any of the other issues that were at play here. So what finance needed was something that was beyond just centralizing the finance function. So what really needed to be addressed was the following. A model needed to be introduced that would address the process, service and costs, so deliver process excellence, service excellence and significant cost reduction. So legend has it that 4 consultants from A.T. Kearney came up with the concept of shared services. So this was the kind of Eureka moment. Let's have a look at what it actually is. At its core, it is the total reorganization of a function. Now, we're talking about finance here today. So we're just zeroing in on the total reorganization of the finance function, really looking at 5 key steps. And these steps are centralizing your activities, so centralizing the process, consolidating your systems, your accounting systems, your ERPs, boiling it down from, say, maybe 200 to 5 or 4, 3, 2, 1, ideally, standardizing those processes. So there really is one key way of doing something, and anything else that's not following that one key way of doing something is a bad process and will over time be converted to a good process. Automating those processes, step number 4, and step number 5, moving into continuous improvement. With anything, as you can imagine, steps don't naturally just happen in these kind of nice, clean ways. There's a lot of overlapping. Some things might happen sooner than others, potentially, and some of these steps may be swapped, but this seems to be the natural kind of evolution or pathway of a shared services organization. Doesn't stop there. The really important essence of shared services is that it treats the rest of the internal business like a customer. So it talks of internal customers. And this means that there is a service mentality between or within the shared services when it's dealing with the business units that it's actually taken the finance function away from. There are service level agreements in place between the shared services organization and the business units that it is now serving. And there are charging mechanisms in place, i.e. that shared services organisation is now going to charge the business unit for the 50,000 invoices that it processes on that business unit's behalf. So let's take a deeper look. The time frame of a shared services journey, it can go on for decades, quite frankly. The early adopters that started in the mid-1990s, guess what? They're still very much on the journey, still probably in the finer parts of standardization, and they're automating and moving into, or have moved into, continuous improvement loop. So starting at the beginning, centralization is nearly always the first step for a shared services organization. It takes between 12 and 18 months. It's a fairly traumatic part of the overall process, which is kind of unfortunate because it is the first step to be taken and can often put a shared services organization in a bit of a bad light, because it is so disruptive and so traumatic for the organisation. So this is what it looks like. Going back to that footprint that we were looking at earlier, you had the business units in the blue blocks with their own local finance teams in the orange circles. These are all shut down. There might be an exception for a particular reason where maybe 1 or 2 people can be kept locally, but fundamentally they're all shut down. And we've got some orange circles, yellow circles left here. These are going to be our shared services centre locations. So these are actually going to then expand into shared services centres. And the people that were working in the accounts payable or finance teams before shared services, this is where the trauma comes in. They will either be relocated or they will be moved into other roles. They will be asked to take early redundancy or early retirement, or they may be kept locally if there's a particular reason. But you're probably seeing maybe a headcount across your accounts payable process of say 100 people, or let's say 300 people, being reduced down to maybe 80 people, and those 80 people being moved into the shared services organisation, or maybe the shared services organisation now needs to do local recruitment for those roles. So it is highly traumatic. You are looking at huge cost savings, and those cost savings amount to a reduction of about $60 to $100 per invoice, down to about $30 per invoice, just because of really the economies of scale that come from the act of centralisation. With a shared services centre, you can stand up, the terms of often stand up. We've stood up our shared services organisation in a brownfield location, so that could be an existing floor of an existing building within the organisation already, which you're then going to convert into your shared services centre, and that's brownfield. Or you can go for the greenfield option. Greenfield is where we're like, okay, we're going to actually build this thing, and we're going to build it in a location that really serves us, where the local schools are great, so our shared services team members can send their children to great schools, where the local colleges are great, so we can recruit from local colleges, where it's obviously geopolitically safe, and where from a travel perspective we can fly people in from HQ and they don't need to take too many planes to get here. So that's a key consideration as well. So then we move on to a period which is not quite so traumatic for the business. It's consolidation. And this is consolidation of ERPs or accounting systems. And that takes 18 months to 4 years generally. It's a massive investment for companies. Sometimes it's the biggest investment that a finance function might make in a generation. So over a period of say 20 years or so. It can be pretty punchy, and so it's something that organizations try to get right from the get-go. You might do it alongside your centralization setup, or you might do it just after. Rarely do we hear of it happening before, but it can happen before centralization. And we're going to term it now as the second phase of the shared services journey. Most enterprise organizations will choose SAP, Oracle. These have been the popular ones over the past couple of decades. And we are seeing companies, or we have seen companies, reduce their ERP numbers down from about 250 instances or ERPs down to anywhere between 1 and 5. It helps a great deal with driving down your cost per invoice, because now you have visibility, you have more control over your numbers. So you're really looking at a cost per invoice dropping down to about $20. The third step is ongoing. It takes years. The first step was the most traumatic for the business. Generally speaking, the third step, standardization, is considered the hardest. And that's really because it's very much an ongoing state. And you're looking to change the behaviour of thousands of people touching your purchase to pay process. So these people are your suppliers, buyers in procurement, the local business units, people that need to approve invoices or approve purchase orders, people in the factories that need to generate goods receipt notes. So anybody that really impacts your purchase to pay process, they need to be go through a change management process so that they can comply with what you consider to be good behaviour. So there's a lot of change management effort involved. Sometimes not often for shared service organisation, there is no qualified change manager in place, and it's something that's often overlooked within shared services. So let's try and do a change management program without an actual change manager in place, and that can be challenging. It's a lot about communicating your needs and wants, and what's in it for them and what's in it for the business, and really educating people on why they should be following a good process, what it really does mean to the bottom line. A good standardization program means that you end up with a cost per invoice around $10, the $10 mark. And just remember, we started at about $60 to $100. We're now at $10, and we're on step 3 of the shared services journey. So standardization is an exciting phase. You get great results as a result of it, but it is ongoing and takes years. Really, it's a cluster of marginal gains, and what we mean by that is looking at a KPI, say for first-time match rate. When you're moving into standardization, maybe you enter standardization with your first-time match rate being, say, 78%, and over, say, a 7-year period, you might get that up to 92%. So it's not something that happens overnight, and that's because you've got all these different users involved that need to change their behavior to get the results that you're after. The 4th stage is automation. Now, this again is ongoing, and this can happen very much in lockstep with standardization as well. And sometimes people do it ahead of standardization, thinking that actually an automation program will give you a bit of a head start into your standardization journey. So here we're talking about it as step 4. Early automation started about 25 years ago with scanning and OCR. There were obviously savings that were gleaned from these kinds of technologies. OCR has now seen much development in the last 20-25 years. And of course, we've seen a lot of e-invoicing programs that have helped with a lot of shared services organisations' journeys. A lot of shared services are looking to move to touchless. They want to get to that end state of touchless processing. So they want to eliminate as much as possible and then automate what's left. And electronic invoicing is great for the automation piece because you are effectively just moving to touchless processing, and you're getting great results as a result of electronic invoicing. But again, that's another program that can take years, and it's a big change management and communication effort. So with technology, you're looking roughly to, certainly with e-invoicing, to reduce your cost per invoice down to about $1 an invoice if all the content on that invoice is correct, and it can facilitate a first-time match. So let's take a pause here before we go on to the 5th step and just talk about the essence that we referred to earlier, the kind of the customer focus, running a shared service is running like a business within a business, and kind of charging mechanisms that might be at play and be introduced. So when are they introduced, and how does all that work? After each of these big steps, there's a period of stabilization where everyone just takes a breath, and then you move into the next phase. And it's kind of during these stabilization periods where you kind of get business back to kind of business as usual before you then launch into the next big step on the shared services journey. And it might generally be during the stabilization period that you connect with your customer just to say, how's it going for you? What are your key issues right now? What are your key wants and needs given what we've gone through? And then you kind of start really honing your service delivery and your charging mechanisms and things like that. So the internal customer, just to remind you, these would be the business units that are left behind and are now being serviced by the shared services organisation, i.e. the 50,000 invoices that they had processed in a local finance team just down the corridor and now being processed within the shared services organisation. So all of these business units are now the customer of the shared services organisation. They are the bill payer. They will be billed on probably a quarterly basis for all the invoices that the shared services processes on its behalf. So shared services, as mentioned, very much a business within a business. They will want to charge. So let's talk about charging. How does that work? The shared services might charge on an activity-based costing basis. They might charge on a flat fee basis, which might be based on the revenue of that business unit or the headcount of that business unit. But the pricing or the charging that I get very excited about is incentive-based charging. So what does that mean? It means that if a business unit, say in France, has 50,000 invoices that are being processed by the shared services centre on its behalf, let's just say 25,000 of those are paper and non-PO, and the other 25,000 are electronic and PO. It would mean for the paper non-PO volume, they would be charged, say, $40 an invoice, which is more than it probably costs the shared services centre, but they're turning the heat up a little bit to make it a bit more uncomfortable for that particular bill payer. The flip side is that the electronic PO-based invoices will be charged back to that the French CFO at $1 an invoice, so maybe less than it is actually costing the business. But there's such a wide disparity between the two numbers to drive positive behaviour. Incentive-based charging can be a struggle to administer. It is a bit of a pain, but it makes a lot of business sense. For the wider business, it really presents a lot of benefit. It's not right pocket, left pocket, right pocket, funny money. It really does drive behaviour at a country level, at a user level, so that everybody is following a compliant process, and ultimately you're saving the business a huge amount of money. If you can get everyone on side, so they're actually driving out paper, they're driving out non-PO invoices, the savings are well into the millions for most enterprise organizations, possibly tens of millions. So it's something that I think is very sensible as far as a charging mechanism is concerned. We now move to continuous improvement. Continuous improvement is the final stage, but is there a final stage to shared services? It is an ongoing journey to get to a destination which always seems to get further and further away. Continuous improvement really is ongoing transformation. So it could be big transformation programs like outsourcing, offshoring, moving to a GBS, or it might be smaller programs where you're moving to specific sub-processes or parts of sub-processes to really see improvement within those areas. So shared service organisations will want to continuously improve. It's in the blood of a shared services director. They're never going to get somewhere and just stand still. It means, therefore, there's probably year-on-year savings, so targets in place. If there aren't year-on-year savings or targets, then you've got to ask yourself if they're a legitimate shared services organisation. It probably means they're not going to move at a clip. Shared services organisations love scope. So once they've secured success in their finance shared services, which might be the transactional part of finance, which is typically the first part of the process to come into a shared services organisation, then they'll start exploring opportunities in middle finance. They'll then reach across other functions, so HR, IT, real estate, maybe parts of marketing and part of sales. They'll start truncating certain processes that might even feel quite close to the customer to see which parts they can pull into a shared services model. They'll want to take on as many countries as possible. So shared services organisations, they really benefit from having as much scope migrated into their model as possible. About outsourcing, we're seeing, we've gone through waves of it being popular and then a little less popular. We are seeing a bit of nearshoring happening at the moment, where companies are quite keen to get their arms around their own processes and have a bit more control. So we're seeing a little bit of that at play at the moment. So just going back to high-level numbers, the cost to run the finance function before shared services would have been about 4% of your revenue. After doing shared services well, you're looking at about 0.5, roughly 0.5% of your revenue. That really is it. Now, if you'd like to find out more about shared services, or you'd like to find out about working with us, as I mentioned, we run a business community, and we have about 40,000 members and about 160,000 non-members that we have a reach reach across. And we work with about 15 to 20 technology providers each year to help those technology providers win the market. So they see us as a trusted advisor, and we work with them on campaigns. So that could be getting their content out to our members and non-members, or we create content for those 15 to 20 sponsors in the form of ebooks, white papers, reports, articles, webinars. And we also help with generating leads for our 15 to 20 technology provider partners. We feel that we have influence over this market, and our members and non-members see us as a reputable organisation that has great value and great credibility. If you'd like to find out more, my email address is here, susiewest@sharedserviceslink.com, and please do go to our website to find out more. Thanks for your time today. Thank you.